Hi there, and welcome to Enterprise AI Defenders, a show that highlights how enterprise security executives are using innovative technologies to stop the most sophisticated cyber attacks. In each episode, Fortune 500 CISOs share how AI has changed the threat landscape, real-world examples of modern attacks, and the role AI can play in the future of cybersecurity. I'm Evan Reiser, the founder and CEO of Abnormal Security.
And I'm Mike Britton, the CIO and CISO of Abnormal Security. Today on the show, we're bringing you a conversation with Joshua Brown, former Vice President and Global Chief Information Security Officer at H&R Block. H&R Block is one of the largest tax preparation companies in the U.S., with tens of millions of customers relying on its services each year. Managing security for a global enterprise requires defending against large-scale fraud, identity theft, and AI-powered social engineering attacks, all while ensuring compliance with strict regulatory requirements. In this conversation, Joshua discusses how AI accelerates cyber attacks, the challenges of using AI for fraud detection, and the impact of automation on the next generation of cybersecurity teams.
Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Mike and I are really looking forward to this conversation. Maybe to start off, do you mind sharing a little bit about kind of the role you're in today and maybe how you got there in your career?
Yeah, so I actually just finished a 3-year, 9-month stint as the global CISO for H&R Block. I was brought in by the previous CISO as director of security engineering to help kind of reboot the program. He left after 2.5 years. I took the seat, and really, really proud of what I accomplished during my time there. Went from a small team with mostly outsourced services to a globally distributed team. About 7 times the size of what we started with, but all the services were being provided in-house. And so, just a tremendous amount of talent and tremendous amount of pride and ownership of what that team became.
There's been so much going on over the last couple of years with just some rapid developments and just so much explosion of adoption of different technologies in the enterprise. How do you see the threat landscape expanding, and how do you think it's changed with generative AI being on the forefront and just everybody being in this cloud-first world today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and my answer is colored by my past and my experiences, right? So I came up when script kiddies were a big thing, right? And so for anybody listening that doesn't know what a script kiddie is, those are the bad guys that would take work that other people had put time in. They didn't necessarily understand the tool. They didn't have the capability to write the tool themselves, but they could use it. And you got a proliferation of moderately sophisticated attacks from unsophisticated attackers. I think the same thing is happening with AI right now. So it's enabling people to make a leap forward in what they're able to do as an attacker. It makes it easier. It makes it faster. And those are the two things, like particularly the time aspect is what really concerns me, right? So, as I was working on some metrics for the board in the last year, we were looking at, what's our mean time to respond? And I had a lengthy conversation with my boss at the time about, what's the standard, right? What's good? And like, well, the standard, there isn't one. What's good is whatever achieves our risk tolerances, right? It's like trying to go. So I was speaking to him as, he's the CIO in terms of uptime, because that's kind of the world he lives in operations, right? And to go from 2 nines to 3 nines, costs X. To go from 3 nines to 4 nines costs X squared, right? And so the cost to drive some of those reaction times down gets more and more expensive. So you have to decide where your tolerance level is for those things. But, what we were seeing already just in the last year was a proliferation of much more sophisticated phishing attacks, smishing attacks, like all of the ishings. And a lot of them you could tell were AI generated. But they can go from registering a domain and sending out that first attack in a matter of minutes, right? And a lot of these things have been scripted for a long time. That's not new. What's new is how quickly AI can, go find everything about this person I want to target on the web and come up with 5 email topics that are going to, have a high rate of success. And, the attacker didn't have to do any of that hard work. That whole recon aspect and execution can be largely automated through AI.
What you're saying is like I mean, you're kind of implying like the kind of time to pull off an attack, right? It's going down.
Yeah.
And due to the complexity, the growing complexity of the enterprise environment, right? That mean time to response going up. Maybe we're already there, but some of these like lines cross and we get into like a pretty dangerous state where, human brains have got some latency to them, right? So like at what point does, the paradigm of how we do things become, unsustainable?
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a great point. It's extremely worrisome. And, I picked out phishing because I think most of the attacks we were seeing were against people, because people are hard to patch. If you look at what we're already seeing now, like there's been some press in just the last couple of weeks about zero-day vulnerabilities discovered by AI that fuzzing tools hadn't picked up and things like that. And so I think, we used to think that, wow, if you can get a critical patched in 7 days, you're doing really well. Well, that's probably not going to be good enough, is the problem, right? As these things are going to be detected and the attack is going to be driven by AI and it's going to be a much quicker turnaround. So, I think the timelines are definitely shrinking. And so what I'm waiting to see, and I know there's a lot of people talking about it as, the marketing spend machine goes into overdrive, right? And like our tool has 100% more AI than it did yesterday. I have not seen, and to be fair, like I haven't been diving deeply into this, just looking at tools. I haven't seen anything that's just blown me away yet. Like, wow, that's an amazing use of AI. I think as platforms like SIM platforms and XDR platforms, things like that, start integrating it more into their tool sets, you're going to improve, in theory, improve fidelity, improve the rate at which you're able to analyze potential incidents that come up, maybe help you categorize those things in ways that you can put the more serious ones to your big brain people to let them look at. But it's a pretty significant problem. I'll give you another analogy or another example. Obviously, H&R Block, tax company, and there's been, and this is not an H&R Block thing; it's a tax industry thing, right? There's been such a rise in identity theft across the U.S., globally, of course, but our taxpayers are in the U.S. That all of the information you would need to file with the IRS is out there. Social security numbers, former place you live, like all of that kind of stuff. And all of those sort of knowledge-based questions that those platforms use to validate that you are who you say you are can be easily gamed. And this has exploded really since COVID. And so, if you're talking about on a normal year, you might see, 1,000 potentially fraudulent returns, and it jumps up to, let's say, 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million. I don't care how big your team is. You don't have enough analysts to look through that. It's not possible. And so you have to do something with machine learning or AI to be able to narrow that down and help you make faster decisions. Then the big problem is fraud schemes change year to year so substantially that you could we did this. We trained a machine learning model on 1 year of data and got really good fidelity. And then we fed it the next year's data and it was garbage. And so we expect people to be able to adapt and figure those things out, right? From what I've seen, some promising stuff, but it's not there. And so, this is like I said, this is another area of asymmetry that defenders are going to have to deal with for the time being.
You can imagine a world, right? I don't know if it's 1 year out or 10 years out, but at some point, some magical AI can go through and make sure all of our code is perfect and everything is perfectly patched and it's all, amazing. But, people are still fallible, right? And, people are kind of interfaced into these enterprise systems. You can have perfect authentication, but if one person clicks the wrong thing, like, you're kind of bypassing the technical controls. And it does seem like, I'm a little bit newer to cybersecurity, but historically it seems like we've been very focused on infrastructure. So do you think that we're kind of like, I'm not trying to lead the witness here, but like, to what extent do you think we're barking up the wrong tree, right? We're spending a lot of time talking about infrastructure, not a lot of time about people. 5 years out, like, how do you think does that mix shift change, or are we kind of like even working on the right things in cybersecurity?
Well, and I vacillate depending on my mood, whether I'm feeling optimistic or cynical about the value of end user security awareness training, right? And I have to remind myself that, like, yeah, people aren't patchable. They are teachable. But if your security program, if the success of your program depends on end users making the right security choice 100% of the time, like you need to maybe get a different job. Like that is a very hopeful strategy, and it is probably not going to be very successful. I have seen some AI being used by some of the security awareness and like phish testing and training programs. So, somebody fails a phish test a couple times, the AI can give them more tailored training rather than here's the generic thing, the test that we send out to everybody each month. I think there's probably some value there. But really you have to focus on the other side, right? So we kind of had set this North Star of we want to make passwords not matter anymore. So people are going to give up their credentials. We see it constantly across all industries, right? And that flies in the face of like, well, we got our click prone rate down to 5%. Like it still just takes one person, right? So what you have to look at is, okay, I want to make it so that your credentials don't matter anymore, right? And that's a combination of a whole bunch of other buzzwords like zero trust or SASE or SC or any of those things, right? Where you only should be able to get to the things that you're authorized to get to when you need to get to them. And you shouldn't be able to get from a thing that you have access to another thing that you have access to. Those should be discrete connections. And so really from a risk mitigation point of view is we're just trying to get the blast radius as small as possible. We know that small accidents and incidents are going to happen. We want them to not matter to the business.
Today, kind of state-of-the-art phishing training, right, is you have probably someone on the organization whose job is to think about what people should get what types of simulations or training that's kind of, most relevant for them. It's not hard to imagine a future where, some of that work can be done with AI, right? If you know what people's jobs, like presumably AI can know more about, if you're in a 100,000 person organization, AI is going to know more about what's relevant for those individual people than the world's best kind of training analysts. And obviously there'll still be a role for people on the team. But it seems like the nature of security organizations, or even like the org chart of security organizations, is going to change in the era of AI. There's some roles that get added. There's some roles that kind of get split, right? Everyone's probably has some job responsibility on their job description kind of being crossed off, and that now it's an AI. How do you think about, how do how does the organization of security teams change, right? A couple of years down the road as AI changes, again, the IT architecture, the threat landscape, and some of the tools that teams are using?
I was just having this conversation with a developer friend of mine the other day, and the org he's in, they're really pushing kind of these co-pilot tools, right, for the developers. And the goal from the business perspective is, we want to get a 20 to 30% productivity increase out of our development teams. Great. Now, the cynic in me is like, and the business is going to recoup that by reducing the size of their development teams by 20 to 30%, rather than like, look at how much new, cool, great stuff we can get out there. Look at how much tech debt we can burn down, all of those sorts of things. But as far as the structure of the team goes, this was the thrust of the conversation we had. Really experienced developers like seniors and principals are going to use those tools to basically remove all of the rote kind of stuff from their jobs, right? It's going to become a force multiplier for the senior people. For the junior people, I'm talking like really, really, really junior, like associate level type. You are at a risk of, potentially removing some of those people from the workforce. And what concerns me about that is not, it doesn't have anything to do with the accuracy or the capability of the AI tools. It's, okay, well, how do we build senior talent? What happens to those talent pipelines? It reminds me that, have you ever seen the movie Children of Men, where all of a sudden women stop being able to have babies globally, just instantly? They don't know why. And you see the impact of that just cycle through the entire economy, right? So no more pediatricians and no more nursery schools, and then no more kindergartens and no more elementary, and then no more colleges because nobody's, coming to go through those things. I worry about that kind of an impact, right? I think businesses are so hungry for efficiency that I think I would just warn, like, don't trade off long-term gains for short-term gains. Like, you have to have a long-term strategy for this stuff. And in my programs, young in career, not necessarily young in age, talent was absolutely critical to building a really comprehensive, well knit, and living organism of a program. And so we leaned way into moms are entering the workforce, second career, like ex-military, ex-teachers. One of my favorite examples was a guy who was an undercover KCK narcotics cop for 14 years. And, he came in and ended up leading our forensics division because he had the right mindset, right? And so I think, if you look at what I would hope would happen is the same hope that I had for kind of SOAR technologies, right? Is we want to let the big brain people use their big brains on big brain problems. And so you want to automate all the rote stuff away. AI is going to help that and accelerate that. But we also have to look at the other side of, okay, what do we give to interns? What do we give to our new people? Because you need those people to be able to grow and learn. And we already have a talent shortage in the industry, right? Like I think AI can help, but it could also really hurt long term in terms of what we're doing industry wide.
That's actually a really good point that I don't think if anyone else bring up on the show. Like, there's some obvious wins of kind of like increasing productivity and removing some of that work, but then how do you get the next generation of senior people, right? It's like it's not super obvious.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And I think if we expect our colleges and universities to be pre-professional programs and to provide whatever training is needed, like that is not happening now. I wouldn't anticipate that's happening in the future. And I worry less about bigger organizations that have a team that can kind of absorb some of these changes, and much more about like small and mid-sized businesses, which are already underserved from a security perspective.
Do you have any examples or tangible things that you've seen from AI that maybe were a little bit surprising? I think we've touched on some of the ones where we think AI is potentially able to solve problems, but where has it surprised you?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but I would say I'm heartened to see what some of the major SIEM, at least the next gen SIEM platforms, are starting to do. I was looking at one the other day that was claiming, that it automatically created detections mapped to 90% of the MITRE ATT&CK framework or something. And I don't know, most teams that are doing that work manually, like that is hard work, to figure those things out and get those automations built. So I thought that was pretty cool, right? If you can use AI to improve the fidelity of the tools that you already have, that's a force multiplier, right? Just like automation was supposed to be. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty heartening. I've been disappointed at how some places they're claiming they're using AI or ML, and you don't really see a difference in the effectiveness of the product. Like, it's all happening behind the scenes. I don't want to call out any specific products, but I was really impressed by a product not too long ago, and it's like a SaaS. It's a SaaS posture management type of tool, right? And all it's doing as these different platforms. I mean, Microsoft has a graph database in the background. I know SailPoint is just transitioning to graph. Like, some of these big players, right, in the space are switching to graph database on the background, and you can mine that data and collect all of the really weak signals. And if you have the right kind of learning model there, it can really help you sift through that data, much as a way a SIEM would, right? But anyway, these kind of point solutions are starting to show real promise in that space. And again, it's not just driving down detection time, but it's driving up detection accuracy. The last thing you want is your SOC to just be swarmed with constant alerts that are of low value.
You mentioned SIEM, and I feel like that's one of those areas that it's just, long in the tooth and ripe for disruption. Do you feel like there's other domains or other technology families where, it's the same kind of thing where it's long overdue for some disruption and AI could be that disruptor?
Well, yeah. And I think it's for me, it's for tools that had great promise, but the promise wasn't really actualized. Like, UABA is a great example of that. And lots of different platforms build UABA into it, right? If you're a Microsoft shop, like, and you've got E5 licensing, you can do stuff like impossible travel, right? Those are the most kind of basic examples. So I'll tell you about a weird attack pattern that I was discussing with some peers not too long ago, and it was one of those Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns type of things. Like, we hadn't really thought about this. So we're so focused on the devices that we give people through which they can access resources of value. Whether that's a tax pro who's doing taxes, whether it's a sales guy who's combing through his CRM tool to find the next prospect. We started seeing people get targeted on their personal devices, and these are not BYOD devices, right? These are literally like, I'm at grandma's house and now I'm getting targeted on grandma's computer. And a part of this, I think, has to do with how our digital identities follow us wherever we are. But it was really kind of a puzzler for us. Like, okay, like we would hope that a user would know, like, well, this is my personal device. I do zero work on this device, and now it's prompting me for my work credentials. I probably shouldn't enter those. But as we said, we know people are going to do that. So then from our side, the question was like, how do we detect that? And it was a big, it was a bit of a head scratcher moment, and followed by a lot of navel gazing as we're like, I feel kind of sick to my stomach now, and I maybe need to go sit somewhere dark for a while and just rock. But, some of these tools are now looking at those back end graph databases around identity and saying, oh, hey, this, while it does, like the person gave the right username and password, and they did complete multi-factor authentication. This is a device we've never seen before. And then we see the behavior of that account immediately after the bad guys have the credentials, right? You see all this bad stuff happen in a flash because it's all scripted. And I think, AI recognizing that, collating that, and raising the red flag is going to be way faster than your analyst poring over that data and trying to figure out what's going on. So I think, force multiplier, time reducer, efficacy increaser, like those are all powerful things. But you're right. SIM is ripe for disruption. And I think you're right. There's a lot of other tools, identity platforms. Probably we're seeing lots more AI in those. It's also fascinating to me how some of these players are now like expanding their scope to try to become platform plays to compete with the Microsofts of the world. Right. I mean, CrowdStrike started off as like EDR, a really good EDR, right? And now they've got just all of these adjacent services, and they're trying to take over that whole space, which, I mean, good for them, right? That's if you can do it well, it's a great play to make.
So Josh, for the kind of maybe the last 5 minutes or so, we like to do a bit of a lightning round, just get your kind of like quick hit, kind of one tweet answers, right, to questions that are impossibly hard to answer in one tweet. So Mike, why don't you kick us off? We got like 4 or so.
Sure. What advice would you give to a security leader who's stepping into their very first CISO job about maybe something they might overestimate or underestimate about the role?
Spend more time listening, especially your first 90 days. A lot of people want to come in, they want to make a difference, they want to show they know what they're doing, they want to make an impact. If you're coming into an established program or established company, you need to take the time to learn from the people that are there and have been in the trenches, instead of dictating. The other piece I would say is people want to be creative and they want to be producers. They don't want to be ticket takers largely. And so how you motivate a team is by connecting them with the why of what they're doing and letting them figure out the how. That's why you hire people smarter than you, right? It's not so that everybody does things the way you do it. And so those are the 2 bits of advice I would give. I know you only asked for 1, but you got a bonus one.
Josh, one of the reasons why we're excited to have you on the show is because you're pretty forward thinking when it comes to how AI is going to change cybersecurity, right? We spent the last 40 minutes talking about that. If you're maybe a CISO out there that feels like maybe they're on the lagging edge of that kind of knowledge versus leading edge, what would be your advice about how people should kind of stay up to date and start thinking a little more about what's important going forward?
Yeah, it's, Evan, it's a great question. It's tough, right? Because, as you noted early on, like the CISO role is pretty demanding, high stress, high pressure. There's always stuff to learn. And so what I tried to do, and I wasn't always successful, but I tried to carve out an hour each day just for random research. there's a ton of stuff. Like you can go down the rabbit hole in a variety of places, Reddit or just Googling things. There's tons of content on YouTube. Go to conferences and network and meet people and talk to smart people. And don't necessarily just go to security conferences. Like look for conferences that are like CIO, CISO conferences. Those are pretty good. Because what you want to do is you want to expose yourself to not just what your company is thinking and doing, but what the industry is thinking and doing. Especially in the last few months, I didn't do a great job of that because we were so focused on getting ready for tax season. But it's important in this role to be a lifetime learner, and you have to be just digesting as much information as you can all the time.
So speaking of that, on the more personal side, what's a book that you've read that's had a big impact on you and why? And it doesn't have to be book related.
No, so the last kind of businessy book I read was called The Right Kind of Wrong. I forget the woman's name who wrote it, but she's brilliant. And it really reinforced to me that for not just a security department, but I think for any sort of an IT department, maybe broader than that, I haven't really thought about it, for it to thrive, you have to enable people to take reasonable risks, and you have to motivate them to want to take reasonable risks, which means, I think Brene Brown said this, that growth comes at the point of struggle, right? We don't learn by winning, we learn by losing. And too many places, they'll say it's a blameless culture, but they don't celebrate the loss in terms of driving lessons from it. And I think that's really, really important. And so creating the psychological safety in a security program so that people can, we used to say, like, we put the guardrails up in the background so that people, it's a safe space to try dangerous things. I think that is just a fundamental truth of trying to engender creativity and risk taking.
What advice would you share to inspire the next generation of security leaders?
I think that getting people to see the value of what security practitioners bring to the table, regardless of the industry, private, public, education, doesn't matter. You have to get people to care about the outcome. Otherwise, you're just getting a paycheck, right? And I've certainly worked with people that in the past that they just want to work a 9 to 5 and get paid and go home, and I get that. Especially, like our lives are complicated enough, right? And we're more than just what we do. But the people who become really successful in cyber really kind of eat, live, and breathe it. And if you don't have a passion for it, it's probably not the right fit for you because it's, the burnout rate is high, the hours can be long. You're not always everybody's favorite person. Especially in a corporate environment, right? It's too easy for a department to become the place where good ideas go to die. And so you really have to be thinking differently about it, and you have to be passionate about the outcomes you're trying to drive.
Josh, really appreciate you making time. Great catching up with you, and looking forward to chatting more soon.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, guys. Thanks so much.
That was Joshua Brown, former Vice President and Global Chief Information Security Officer at H&R Block. I'm Mike Britton, the CIO and CISO of Abnormal Security.
And I'm Evan Reiser, the founder and CEO of Abnormal Security. Thanks for listening to Enterprise AI Defenders. Please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Learn more about how AI is transforming the enterprise from top executives at enterprisesoftware.blog. This show is produced by Josh Meir. See you next time.